Veltar pressed his clawed finger against the datapad, scrolling through the transmission logs from 3 months ago. The blue glow of the screen hurt his eyes, but he needed to understand what had happened. As the chief archivist of the Galactic Council, it was his job to record important events. But this event made no sense. The humans were gone. All of them. He looked at the final message from Earth again. It was so simple that many council members had laughed when they first heard it. Captain Li Dongwu, the human ambassador, had appeared on the main communication screen in the council chamber. He was a small man with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore the simple blue uniform that all human diplomats used. The people of Earth thank the Galactic Council for the opportunity to participate in galactic affairs, Li had said in his quiet voice. However, we have decided to withdraw from all treaties and agreements. We will no longer be part of the galactic community. This is our final message. That was it. No anger, no threats, no explanation of why they were leaving. Li had bowed, slightly, the way humans always did when they were being polite, and the transmission had ended. Veltar remembered how the council had reacted. Most of the members had been happy. The Zephyrians had cheered with their high-pitched voices. The Gornaki had stomped their feet on the floor. Even the usually calm Etherians had seemed pleased. Finally, Senator Crixhan had said, his purple tentacles waving in excitement, "The troublemakers are gone. Now we can have peace in the galaxy." Many others had agreed. The humans had always been different. They asked too many questions. They wanted to change things that had worked fine for thousands of years. They were too emotional, too unpredictable. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were primitive and backward. Veltar looked at his notes from that day. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for only 50 years. That was very short compared to other species. The Zephyrians had been members for over 2,000 years, the Gornaki for even longer. Humans were the newest members, and many older species had never accepted them as equals. The problems had started early. Humans always wanted to help with things that other species said were impossible to fix. When the Deltari system had problems with their food supply, humans had offered to help. The Council had said no. When the mining colonies in the Outer Rim had asked for better safety equipment, humans had volunteered to design new systems. Again, the Council had refused. They think they know better than us, the Gornaki representative had complained. They have been in space for less than 100 years. We have been traveling between stars for millennia. Veltar had to admit that the humans did seem arrogant sometimes. They would suggest solutions to problems that other species had been dealing with for centuries. Dr. Park Mi-young, one of their scientists, was always trying to share new technologies with other species. She would come to the science committee meetings with ideas that sounded impossible. "We have found a way to grow food faster," she would say. "We can share this with worlds that have hunger problems." The committee always said no. They had their own ways of doing things. They did not need help from a species that had barely learned how to leave their home planet. Now Veltar wondered if they had made a mistake. He pulled up the reports from the day the humans left. It had not just been Earth that went silent. Every human colony, every human space station, every human ship had vanished at exactly the same time. The timing was perfect, like they had planned it for years. The Council had sent ships to check on human territories. They found empty space stations with all the equipment gone. The colonies were abandoned, but there was no sign of fighting or panic. Everything valuable had been removed, but the basic structures were left behind, clean and undamaged. How did they move so many people so quickly? Veltar had asked during the emergency meeting. "Who cares?" Senator Thale had replied. "They are gone. That is what matters." But Veltar did care. In 50 years, humans had built colonies on 17 different worlds. They had space stations in 12 systems. They had thousands of ships traveling through galactic space. Moving all of those people and all of that equipment would have taken months of planning and enormous resources. The humans had done it in one day. Veltar scrolled through more files. He found records of human requests that had been denied by the Council. There were hundreds of them. Humans had asked to help with medical research, denied. They had offered to assist with infrastructure problems. Denied. They had volunteered to mediate disputes between other species. Denied. Every request had been rejected because other species thought humans were too young, too inexperienced, too different. He found a video message from 2 years ago. Dr. Park Mi-young was speaking to the science committee. She looked tired and frustrated. "We have developed new materials that could help build better space stations," she said. "These materials are stronger and lighter than anything currently used. We want to share this technology freely." The committee, chairman, a tall Etherian named Zorthak, had barely looked at her proposal. "Human technology is not compatible with our systems," he had said. "We do not need your help." Dr. Park had tried to explain that the materials could be adapted for any system, but the committee had already moved on to other business. Veltar paused the video. He had been in that meeting. He remembered thinking that Dr. Park looked like she wanted to cry, but she had not cried. She had simply gathered her papers and left quietly. He wondered where Dr. Park was now. Where were all the humans? The strange thing was that no other species had heard from them since they left. Usually, when a species withdrew from the council, they still maintained some contact with the galaxy. They still traded goods or shared information. But the humans had completely disappeared. Veltar had tried to contact some of the human scientists he had worked with over the years. None of them responded. Their communication networks were either shut down or blocked to outside signals. He looked at the financial records. Before they left, humans had been involved in many galactic businesses. They had contracts with mining companies, shipping firms, and technology corporations. All of those contracts had been completed or properly terminated before the Exodus. The humans had paid all their debts and fulfilled all their obligations. They had left without owing anyone anything. Veltar found that impressive. Most species that left the council did so because of financial problems or political disputes. They usually left behind angry business partners and unpaid bills, but the humans had been careful to clean up all their affairs before departing. Captain Lee Dongwu had been their ambassador for the last 10 years. Veltar had spoken with him many times during council sessions. Lee was always polite and patient, even when other species were rude to him. He never raised his voice or showed anger, even when the council rejected human proposals without discussion. Veltar remembered their last conversation, just 1 week before the Exodus. They had been talking about a trade dispute between the Gornaki and the Zephyrians. "The humans could help mediate this problem," Lee had suggested quietly. "We have experience with similar disputes." "The Gornaki and Zephyrians do not need human interference," Veltar had replied, following the official council position. Lee had nodded and smiled sadly. "Of course, I understand." Now Veltar realized that Lee had probably known it would be his last week as ambassador. He had probably known that humans were planning to leave, but he had continued doing his job, trying to help, even knowing that his people were about to disappear forever. Veltar closed the datapad and looked out the window of his office. The view showed the busy space lanes around the council station. Ships from dozens of species moved in carefully controlled patterns, carrying goods and passengers throughout the galaxy. For 3 months, no human ships had been seen in those lanes. For 3 months, the galaxy had been operating without humans, and everything seemed to be working fine. So why did Veltar feel like something important was missing? Crixon stared at the numbers on his screen and felt his tentacles curl with worry. As the head economic analyst for the Trade Federation, he had seen many small problems over the years. But these numbers showed something bigger, something that made his purple skin turn pale. 6 months had passed since the humans left and the galaxy was starting to break. It had begun with small things. A medical station in the Outer Rim reported that they were running out of a pain medicine that worked very well. The medicine had been cheap and effective, and many hospitals throughout the galaxy used it. But now they could not get more. "Where did this medicine come from?" Crixon had asked his assistant. "A human company made it," she replied. "They had the only factory that produced it." Crixon had not been worried at first. Surely other companies could make the same medicine. But when he looked deeper, He found that the human company had never shared their formula with anyone. They had sold the medicine cheaply to anyone who needed it, but they had kept the secret of how to make it. Now dozens of hospitals were asking for help. Patients were suffering because they could not get the medicine that had helped them before. Other companies were trying to create a replacement, but it would take years of research and testing. That was just the beginning. Crixhan found more problems in his weekly reports. Agricultural worlds in 3 different systems were having trouble with their crops. The plants were growing poorly and producing less food than expected. The farmers had been using special seeds that grew faster and stronger than normal plants. Those seeds had come from human research stations. Dr. Choi Yuna had been the lead scientist working on crop development. Crixhan found her research papers in the Galactic database. She had spent years creating plants that could grow in difficult conditions. Her seeds could survive droughts, resist diseases, and produce more food per plant than any other varieties. Chibi's problem was that Dr. Choi's seeds were designed to be replaced every growing season. This prevented farmers from becoming too dependent on any single type of plant. It also meant that farmers needed to buy new seeds regularly, but now there were no new seeds. The human research stations were empty. Dr. Choi and her team had vanished with all their equipment and knowledge. The farmers were trying to save seeds from their last harvest, but those seeds were not producing healthy plants. Entire worlds were facing food shortages. Crixhan called an emergency meeting with the Trade Federation Council. Representatives from 12 species gathered in the conference room to discuss the growing problems. "This is temporary," insisted Senator Blacktar, a large Gornaki with thick armor plates covering his body. "Other species will develop replacements for human products. We do not need human help." "How long will that take?" asked Yilshin, a small Etherian with glowing blue eyes. "My homeworld imports 60% of its food from agricultural colonies that used human seeds. Our people are already eating smaller meals." Crixhan shared more troubling news. Emergency response systems throughout the galaxy were having coordination problems. When disasters happened, it was taking much longer to organize rescue efforts. Ships were arriving at the wrong locations. Supplies were being sent to places that did not need them. The coordination software was developed by humans, he explained, a team led by engineer Kim Jae-ho. They created a system that could automatically organize emergency responses across multiple star systems. The system had worked so well that most species had forgotten it existed. When an earthquake happened on a mining world, the system would automatically contact the nearest medical ships, arrange for emergency supplies, and coordinate rescue teams from different planets. It had saved millions of lives over the past 20 years, but the system required constant updates and maintenance. Kim Jae-ho and his team had been quietly working to keep it running smoothly. Now the system was starting to fail because no one else understood how it worked. "Surely we can fix it ourselves," Senator Blacktar said. "How complicated can it be?" Crixhan showed him the technical documentation. It was thousands of pages long and filled with complex mathematical formulas. The human team had been working on the system for decades, constantly improving and updating it. "We would need years just to understand how it works," Crixhan said. "And that is if we can find experts who are smart enough to figure it out." The meeting lasted for hours. Representatives shared similar stories from their own worlds. Medical facilities were struggling without human-designed equipment. Transportation systems were having problems because humans had quietly improved the navigation software. Even simple things like water purification systems were starting to fail. Medic Han Woo-jin had developed treatment protocols that were used in hospitals throughout the galaxy. His methods had reduced death rates from common diseases by almost half. But his protocols required specific equipment and techniques that other species had never fully understood. Doctors had simply followed the procedures without learning the science behind them. Now, as the equipment broke down and needed replacement, hospitals were discovering that they did not know how to maintain Han's systems. Death rates were starting to rise again. "Why did they make everything so complicated?" Senator Blacktar complained. But Crixhan was beginning to understand that the humans had not made things complicated. They had made things better, and they had done it so quietly that no one had noticed. He spent the next week reviewing old trade records. He discovered that humans had been involved in far more galactic businesses than anyone realized. They had not been the leaders of these businesses. They had not demanded credit for their work. They had simply been the engineers, scientists, and technicians who kept things running. A shipping company in the core worlds was having trouble with their cargo management system. The system had been designed by human programmers who made it run faster and more efficiently. Now that the humans were gone, the system was developing errors that no one knew how to fix. A mining operation on the edge of the galaxy was struggling because their safety equipment was not working properly. Human engineers had quietly upgraded the equipment to prevent accidents. Without regular maintenance from people who understood the improvements, the equipment was becoming dangerous to use. Crixhan found hundreds of similar examples. In every case, humans had taken existing technology and made it work better. They had not demanded payment or recognition. They had simply fixed problems and improved systems because that was what they did. And they had done it so well that other species had forgotten how things worked before the humans arrived. Yilshan contacted Crixhan privately after the meeting. Her homeworld was in serious trouble. The food shortage was getting worse and her government was starting to panic. "Can we contact the humans?" she asked. "Can we ask them to come back and help us?" Crixhan had already tried. He had sent messages to the last known human communication networks. He had contacted species that had been friendly with humans, hoping they might know how to reach them. He had even sent ships to explore the areas where human colonies used to be. Nothing. The humans had disappeared completely. "It is like they never existed," he told Yilshan, "except for all the things they left behind that are now breaking." The conversation made Crixhan think about Captain Li Dongwu, the human ambassador. Li had always been quiet and polite during Trade Federation meetings. He never argued or demanded attention. He would sit in the back of the room and take notes, occasionally asking simple questions that seemed obvious. Now Crixhan realized that Li's questions had not been obvious at all. They had been designed to help him understand exactly how different galactic systems worked. Li had been learning about everything humans would need to know to leave cleanly. How do shipping contracts work if one party leaves the galaxy? Li had asked during a meeting about trade law. What happens to medical licenses when the issuing organization no longer exists? He had wondered during a discussion about professional regulations. Everyone had thought Li was just curious about abstract legal questions. Now Crixhan understood that Li had been planning the exodus for years, making sure humans would not leave behind any problems for other species to deal with. The humans had been more honorable in their departure than most species were in their regular business dealings. Crixhan worked late into the night, trying to calculate how much the galaxy was losing without human contributions. The numbers were frightening. Food production was down 15%. Medical effectiveness was dropping. Emergency response times were getting longer. Transportation costs were rising as systems became less efficient. And this was only after 6 months. He thought about all the human scientists, engineers, and technicians who had quietly kept galactic civilization running smoothly. People like Dr. Choi Yuna, who had prevented famines on dozens of worlds. People like Kim Jae-ho, who had saved millions of lives by coordinating disaster responses. People like Han Woo-jin, who had helped doctors heal patients more effectively. They had never asked for fame or recognition. They had simply done their jobs and tried to help. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what it had lost. But Crixhan feared it might already be too late to get them back. Commander Thalos looked at the battle report spreading across his desk and felt his scales turn dark with worry. As head of Galactic Military Intelligence, he had seen many conflicts over his long career. But what was happening now was different. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, and he was starting to understand why. 1 year had passed since the humans disappeared, and everything was falling apart. The first war had started in the Kalari sector. The Gornaki and the Zephyrians had been arguing over mining rights to an asteroid field for decades. It was an old dispute that flared up every few years, but it had always been settled peacefully. This time was different. The arguments had turned into threats. The threats had become attacks. Now both species had military fleets facing each other across the disputed territory, and neither side was willing to back down. "Send in the mediators," Thalos had ordered when the fighting first began. "Sir," his aide replied nervously, "the mediation protocols are not working. The diplomatic software keeps giving error messages." Thalos had investigated personally. The galactic mediation system had been designed to help species resolve conflicts peacefully. It would analyze the history of disputes, suggest fair compromises, and even arrange neutral meeting spaces. The system had prevented hundreds of wars over the past 30 years, but now he discovered that the core programming had been written by human diplomats. Diplomat Yoon Tai-min had led the team that created the software. He had studied thousands of conflicts throughout galactic history and had found patterns that helped predict which solutions would work. Yoon had been a small, quiet man who rarely spoke during military briefings. When he did speak, his suggestions always seemed too simple to work, but somehow they did work. Species that had been enemies for centuries would find ways to cooperate after following Yoon's advice. The mediation system had been Yoon's greatest achievement. It had automatically prevented 3 major wars by suggesting creative solutions that satisfied all parties involved. But the system required constant updates as new conflicts arose and political situations changed. Without Yoon and his team to maintain it, the system was becoming useless. Thalos tried to find other diplomats who could fix the mediation software. He contacted the best negotiators from a dozen species. None of them understood how Yoon's system worked. The programming was too complex, and the psychological models were beyond their expertise. "Humans think differently than we do," explained Kervash, a respected Etherian diplomat. "They see patterns in behavior that we miss. I studied Yoon's methods for years, but I never understood how he knew what would work. Without working mediation systems, old conflicts were starting again. The Gornaki and Zephyrians were just the beginning. In the Delta sector, 3 species were fighting over water rights to a planetary system. In the Outer Rim, mining guilds were attacking each other over territorial boundaries. But the military problems went deeper than failed diplomacy. Thalos discovered that defensive systems throughout the galaxy were starting to malfunction. Planetary shields that protected against asteroid impacts were failing. Early warning networks that detected dangerous space storms were giving false readings. Even basic communication arrays were having problems. He called in his best technical analysts to investigate. What they found was disturbing. "Sir, most of our defensive technology uses quantum algorithms that we do not fully understand," reported Chief Analyst Wekton. "The algorithms were developed by human scientists and then shared with other species, but the humans never explained exactly how they work." Dr. Shin Hye-won had been the lead physicist on quantum defense systems. Her theoretical work had revolutionized galactic military technology. Shields that had once been weak and unreliable became strong enough to protect entire planets. Detection systems that had missed important threats became accurate enough to provide days of advance warning. But Shin's quantum algorithms were incredibly complex. She had spent decades developing the mathematical foundations that made them work. Other species had used her formulas without understanding the science behind them. "We followed the instructions," Wekton explained. "The humans provided detailed guides for building and operating the systems, but they never taught us the theory. We know what buttons to push, but we do not know why the buttons work." Now, as the quantum systems aged and developed problems, no one knew how to repair them. The instruction manuals covered routine maintenance, but they did not explain how to fix fundamental errors in the quantum calculations. "How long before the systems fail completely?" Thalos asked. 6 months, maybe less," Wekton replied. "And when they fail, we will have no protection against natural disasters or military attacks." The implications were terrifying. Planets throughout the galaxy depended on human-designed shields for protection. Space stations relied on human-built early warning systems to avoid collisions with asteroids. Even military vessels used human-improved navigation computers to travel safely through dangerous regions of space. Thalos spent weeks reviewing military records from the past 50 years. He found example after example of human contributions that had been overlooked or forgotten. Environmental engineer Bae Jun-ho had single-handedly prevented ecological disasters on 12 different worlds. When planets had problems with pollution, climate change, or ecosystem collapse, Bae would arrive with solutions that seemed impossible. How did one human fix problems that our best scientists could not solve? Thalos wondered. He found Bae's old reports and was amazed by their complexity. Bae had not just treated the symptoms of environmental problems. He had redesigned entire planetary ecosystems to make them stable and self-sustaining. His solutions involved millions of calculations and required understanding of biology, chemistry, physics, and climate science. Now several of those worlds were starting to have environmental problems again. Without Bae's continued monitoring and maintenance, the carefully balanced ecosystems were beginning to collapse. The world of Nexar Prime was facing the worst crisis. Bae had saved the planet from toxic pollution 20 years ago by introducing specially designed microorganisms that could break down dangerous chemicals. The microorganisms had worked perfectly, cleaning the soil and water better than anyone had expected, but the microorganisms needed periodic adjustments to remain effective. Bae had been making those adjustments every few years, quietly tweaking their genetic programming to handle new types of pollution. Without those adjustments, the microorganisms were becoming less effective. Pollution levels were rising again, and the planet's government was starting to panic. "Can we contact Engineer Bae?" they asked desperately. "Our people are getting sick again." Thalos had to tell them what everyone in the galaxy was learning. The humans were gone, and no one knew how to reach them. The military situation was getting worse every day. Without working mediation systems, more conflicts were starting. Without reliable defensive systems, planets were becoming vulnerable to attack. Species that had lived in peace for decades were preparing for war. Thalos called an emergency meeting of all military commanders in the galaxy. Representatives from 30 species gathered at the central command station to discuss the growing crisis. "We need to work together," he told them. "The defensive systems that protect all of us are failing. If we start fighting each other now, we will all be destroyed." But cooperation was becoming impossible. The Gornaki blamed the Zephyrians for the mediation system failures. The Zephyrians accused the Gornaki of deliberately sabotaging diplomatic efforts. Other species were choosing sides or trying to take advantage of the chaos. "The humans were the glue that held us together," admitted General Thokran, a veteran Gornaki commander. "They prevented our old hatreds from turning into wars. Without them, we are reverting to our primitive tribal instincts." Thalos realized that the humans had been more than just contributors to galactic civilization. They had been its stabilizing force. Their diplomatic skills, their technical knowledge, and their environmental expertise had kept dozens of species from destroying each other, and they had done it so quietly that no one had noticed. He thought about all the times human representatives had made suggestions that seemed unnecessary or overcomplicated. Now he understood that those suggestions had been carefully designed to prevent problems before they occurred. When Diplomat Yoon had recommended additional safety protocols for military exercises, other species had thought he was being overly cautious. Now those exercises were resulting in accidents because the safety systems were failing. When Dr. Shin had suggested backup systems for planetary defenses, military leaders had complained about the extra cost. Now those backup systems were the only things preventing disasters on several worlds. When Engineer Bae had warned about long-term environmental risks, politicians had dismissed his concerns as exaggerated. Now those risks were becoming deadly realities. The humans had seen problems coming years in advance and had tried to prepare solutions. But other species had not listened because they thought humans were too inexperienced to understand galactic affairs. Thalos worked through the night, trying to develop plans for dealing with the cascading failures. But every solution he considered required knowledge or technology that only humans possessed. Council Chairman Vorlix called the emergency session to order, but his voice shook with desperation. 18 months had passed since the humans left, and the great chamber that had once hosted representatives from hundreds of worlds now held only a few dozen delegates. Many species could no longer afford to send ambassadors. Others were too busy fighting wars or dealing with disasters to participate in galactic politics. The galaxy was dying, and everyone in the room knew it. "We must face the truth," Forlix announced to the assembled delegates. "Our civilization is collapsing. We need immediate action to prevent total disaster." Senator Crixhahn stood up from his seat, his purple tentacles drooping with exhaustion. He had been working for months to track the cascade of failures spreading throughout the galaxy, and his reports painted a picture of accelerating catastrophe. "The Galactic Communication Network failed completely yesterday," he reported. "We are only able to speak with each other now because this station has backup systems. Most worlds can no longer communicate beyond their own star systems." The communication network had been the backbone of galactic civilization for over 300 years. It allowed instant messages between worlds that were thousands of light years apart. Trade agreements, diplomatic negotiations, emergency coordination, scientific collaboration, everything depended on the network. But now delegates learned that the network's core protocols had been designed by humans. Systems architect Lim Si-young had led the team that rebuilt the communication system 20 years ago. Her improvements had made messages faster, more secure, and more reliable than ever before. The problem was that Lim's design was too advanced for other species to understand. She had used quantum entanglement techniques that were decades ahead of anything other civilizations had developed. The system worked perfectly as long as human technicians maintained the quantum processors that made it possible. Without those technicians, the quantum processors were breaking down one by one. Each failure knocked entire sectors off the communication grid. Soon the galaxy would be reduced to isolated systems with no way to contact each other. "How did we become so dependent on technology we do not understand?" asked Delegate Yilshin, her glowing blue eyes dim with worry. Commander Thylos provided part of the answer. Military transportation was becoming dangerous as navigation systems failed throughout the galaxy. Ships were getting lost in hyperspace. Others were dropping out of faster-than-light travel in the wrong star systems, sometimes light years away from their intended destinations. "Human navigators quietly upgraded our hyperspace calculations," he explained. Captain Oh Soo-jin led exploration teams that mapped dangerous areas and found safe routes through unstable regions. Her navigation improvements prevented thousands of accidents. Oh's work had been so effective that other species had adopted her navigation protocols without question. Star charts throughout the galaxy now included her route recommendations and safety warnings. But the protocols required constant updates as stellar conditions changed and new hazards were discovered. Without Oh and her teams to maintain the navigation, database space travel was becoming a deadly gamble. But the worst crisis was spreading across dozens of worlds. A plague had started in the Outer Rim colonies and was moving toward the core worlds faster than anyone could stop it. The disease caused fever, weakness, and eventually death. Millions of people were already infected. Dr. Kang Min-ho had created the Distributed Medical Response Network that should have contained the plague before it spread. His system could detect disease outbreaks within hours and automatically coordinate responses from medical facilities throughout the galaxy. Vaccines, treatments, and medical personnel would be rushed to affected areas faster than any disease could spread. The system had prevented dozens of potential pandemics over the past 15 years. But like everything else humans had built, it required expertise that no one else possessed. "The medical network is sending treatments to the wrong places," reported Chief Medical Officer Dalwin. "Vaccines are going to worlds that do not need them, while infected populations receive no help at all. The distribution algorithms are completely confused." Dr. Kang had programmed the system to make complex decisions about medical priorities. It could analyze thousands of factors: population density, travel patterns, genetic susceptibility, available resources, and determine the best response to any health crisis. Without Dr. Kang to maintain and update the programming, the system was making increasingly poor decisions. The plague was spreading unchecked while medical resources were wasted on pointless responses. Delegate after delegate shared similar stories of collapse and failure. Agricultural systems were breaking down as human-designed equipment stopped working. Energy production was dropping as power plants struggled without human-maintained efficiency improvements. Even basic life support systems on space stations were starting to fail. "We have been living in a house built by humans," observed Elder Thekmore, the oldest member of the council. "But we never learned how the house was constructed. Now that the builders are gone, we do not know how to keep it from falling down." The irony was painful. For 50 years, the council had treated humans as inexperienced newcomers who needed guidance from older, wiser species. Human suggestions had been dismissed as naive. Human technologies had been accepted, but not understood. Human contributions had been minimized or ignored. Now the galaxy was discovering that humans had not been students learning from their elders. They had been teachers whose lessons had been ignored. Vorlix shared the most disturbing discovery of all. A team of archaeologists had been investigating abandoned human facilities, trying to understand how their technology worked. What they found challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capabilities. "The humans were not primitive," he announced to the shocked assembly. "Their technology was decades ahead of ours. We found research facilities with equipment we cannot even identify, much less operate. They were studying scientific principles that our best theorists consider impossible." The evidence was overwhelming. Humans had been quietly developing technologies that would not be rediscovered by other species for generations, but instead of using their advanced knowledge to dominate the galaxy, they had shared simpler versions of their discoveries to help other civilizations. They had given the galaxy the benefits of advanced science while keeping the most powerful technologies to themselves. "Why?" asked Senator Blacktar, his thick armor plates clicking with agitation. "Why did they pretend to be less advanced than they were?" Veltar, the council archivist, had found the answer in old diplomatic records. Captain Li Dongwu had explained human philosophy during a private conversation that had been recorded for historical purposes. "My people believe that the greatest strength is the ability to help others without being asked for credit," Li had said. "We do not need recognition or praise. We only want to make life better for everyone in the galaxy." The recording continued, with Li discussing human concerns about galactic politics. "Many species fear being controlled by others who are stronger or more advanced," he had observed. "If we revealed our true capabilities, it would create fear and suspicion. We prefer to work quietly and let others believe they are in control." The TIT strategy had worked perfectly. Other species had felt superior to humans while benefiting enormously from human knowledge and assistance. The galaxy had enjoyed unprecedented peace and prosperity, while believing that their own wisdom and strength had created these conditions. But now the galaxy was learning the cost of its arrogance and prejudice. "Can we contact them?" pleaded Yilshan. "Can we apologize and ask them to return?" Every possible method had been tried. Long-range communication arrays had broadcast messages throughout the galaxy, begging humans to respond. Ships had been sent to explore distant regions where human colonies might be hidden. Diplomatic missions had contacted every known alien species, hoping someone had maintained contact with humanity. The response was always the same: silence. "They do not want to be found," Vorlix concluded sadly. "We had our chance to treat them as equals and partners. We chose to treat them as inferiors and outsiders. Now they have moved beyond our reach." As the emergency session continued, delegates shared reports of accelerating collapse. Interstellar trade was breaking down as shipping routes became unsafe. Scientific research was stagnating without human insights and innovations. Cultural exchange was ending as species became isolated and suspicious of each other. But the most disturbing news came from the archives. Archivist Veltar had found hidden files that suggested humans had been preparing for their departure for years. They had quietly been developing technologies that would allow them to leave the galaxy entirely. They were not just planning to withdraw from galactic politics, he reported. They were planning to transcend our entire level of existence. The evidence suggests they found ways to travel beyond our dimensional space. The implications were staggering. Humans had not simply moved to a distant part of the galaxy. They had evolved beyond the limitations that confined other species. They had become something greater than anyone had imagined possible. And they had done it while other species dismissed them as primitive and backward. Elder historian Memthala sat alone in the ruins of the Great Library, surrounded by data crystals and dying computer screens. 2 years had passed since the humans disappeared, and she was probably the last scholar in the galaxy still trying to understand what had really happened. Around her, galactic civilization was crumbling into isolated fragments, but she continued her work because someone needed to record the truth. The truth was more incredible than anyone had imagined. She touched a crystal containing the final records from Admiral Park Kyung-soo, the human military leader who had disappeared with the rest of his people. The crystal had been hidden in a vault beneath the abandoned human embassy, along with dozens of other records that painted a picture of humanity's true role in galactic history. Personal log, Admiral Park Kyung-soo, final entry, the recording, began. Park had been a quiet man with gray hair and tired eyes. Memthala had seen him at military briefings over the years, but he had rarely spoken. Other admirals had treated him as a minor figure from a junior species. Today we begin the final evacuation of human personnel from galactic space, Park continued. Operation Exodus is proceeding on schedule. All civilian populations have been relocated to the new dimensional framework. Military units are completing their withdrawal from defensive positions throughout the galaxy. Memthala paused the recording. Defensive positions? What defensive positions? According to official records, humans had never maintained military bases outside their own territories. She accessed another crystal and found detailed star charts that showed the real scope of human military operations. There were defensive installations in every major star system, early warning stations scattered throughout empty space, and patrol routes that covered the entire galaxy. For 50 years, human ships had been quietly protecting galactic civilization from threats that other species never knew existed. The evidence was overwhelming. Sensor logs showed human vessels intercepting asteroid swarms before they could impact inhabited worlds. Communication records documented human pilots diverting dangerous space storms away from shipping lanes. Battle reports described human forces engaging unknown attackers in the dark spaces between stars. Admiral Park had been commanding a secret fleet of thousands of ships, protecting hundreds of civilizations from disasters they never knew were coming. We have detected 17 incursion attempts by extragalactic entities over the past decade, Park's log continued. Human forces have successfully repelled all attempts at contact or invasion. The other species remain unaware of these threats, as intended. Memthala felt her breathing apparatus flutter with shock. Humans had been fighting wars to protect the galaxy while other species complained about their supposed inexperience and primitive nature. She found more recordings from Dr. John Hae-young, the brilliant physicist who had led human theoretical research. John had developed technologies that were centuries ahead of anything other species possessed. But instead of using these technologies for human advantage, she had carefully shared simplified versions to help improve galactic civilization. We have successfully tested faster-than-light communication using quantum consciousness transfer, Dr. Jian reported in a recording from 3 years ago. However, we will continue using conventional communication methods in our interactions with other species. They are not ready for this level of technology. The recording included technical specifications that made Memthala's head spin. Humans had developed ways to send messages instantly across unlimited distances. They had created energy sources that could power entire star systems. They had even found methods for manipulating time and space in ways that other species considered theoretical impossibilities. But they had kept these discoveries secret, while quietly helping other civilizations advance at their own pace. The most shocking discovery came from archivist Lee Subin, who had been documenting human knowledge for future generations. Lee had left behind detailed instructions for rebuilding galactic civilization after the human departure. We know that our withdrawal will cause significant disruption, Lee had written in her final report. Therefore, we are leaving comprehensive guides to help other species maintain the systems we have built. These archives contain simplified explanations of our technologies, step-by-step instructions for repairs and maintenance, and theoretical frameworks that will allow gradual advancement toward independence. The archives were hidden throughout human territories, but they were coded with puzzles that would only be solved when other species were ready to understand the knowledge they contained. It was a teaching system designed to guide galactic civilization towards self-sufficiency over several generations. Memthala spent weeks decoding the first level of Lee's archives. What she found was an educational program more sophisticated than anything in galactic history. The humans had not just built the technology that kept civilization running, they had created a way for other species to eventually understand and improve upon their work. But the galaxy had collapsed too quickly for the teaching system to work. Instead of taking time to study and learn, species had panicked and started fighting each other when human-built systems began failing. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of personal messages from individual humans explaining their decision to leave. Engineer Kim Jae-ho, who had maintained the emergency coordination systems, had recorded a farewell message to his alien colleagues. "I have enjoyed working with all of you over the years," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I hope someday the galaxy will be ready to accept humanity as true partners rather than tolerated guests. Until then, we must find our own path among the stars." Dr. Choi Yuna, the agricultural scientist, had left a message for the farmers who used her drought-resistant seeds. "Please do not blame yourselves for the food shortages that will come," she said gently. "We tried to teach others how to maintain the crop varieties, but there was never enough time. The knowledge is there for those who wish to learn it. Look, for the teaching gardens we left on abandoned worlds." Medic Han Woo-jin had recorded a message for the hospitals that would struggle without his treatment protocols. "Healing should never be used as a tool for political control," he explained. "We shared our medical knowledge freely because every life is valuable. Continue to help each other, even when your governments are in conflict. Medicine should unite species, not divide them." Each message revealed the same themes. Humans had wanted to help, they had tried to share their knowledge, but they had never been accepted as equals by the galactic community. Captain Lee Dong-woo, the final human ambassador, had left the longest message. He sat in his empty office, packing the last of his belongings as he spoke directly to the camera. "We came to the galaxy hoping to find friends and partners among the stars," he said quietly. "What we found instead was a community that valued us only for what we could provide, not for who we were. We have spent 50 years trying to prove ourselves worthy of respect and acceptance. But we have realized that we cannot earn what others are unwilling to give." Lee's message continued with an explanation of humanity's true capabilities. "My people possess knowledge and abilities that could transform galactic civilization," he admitted. "We could have revealed our advanced technologies years ago. We could have demanded recognition and authority based on our contributions. But we believed that cooperation built on mutual respect was more valuable than dominance based on superior power." The recording showed Lee looking directly into the camera with eyes full of disappointment and resolve. "We offered partnership, but other species wanted only servants. We offered knowledge, but others preferred to remain ignorant as long as the benefits continued flowing. We offered friendship, but were accepted only as useful strangers." Lee stood up and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the stars that humanity would soon leave behind. "So we choose to depart," he concluded. "Not in anger, but in sadness. Not to punish others, but to find a place where we can be ourselves without pretending to be less than we are. The galaxy will survive without us, though perhaps not as comfortably as before. And we will build something new among distant stars, something based on the principles of equality and mutual respect that we could never establish here." The recording ended with Lee bowing one final time before the camera shut off, forever. Memthala sat in the darkness of the dying library, surrounded by the evidence of the galaxy's greatest mistake. Humanity had not been the primitive species that other civilizations had imagined. They had been teachers, protectors, and builders who had quietly held galactic civilization together, while asking for nothing in return except acceptance and respect. And they had been rejected, dismissed, and undervalued until they finally chose to leave entirely. Now the galaxy was paying the price for its arrogance and blindness. Wars raged between species that had lived in peace for decades. Planets faced starvation as agricultural systems failed. Diseases spread unchecked as medical networks collapsed. The golden age of galactic cooperation was ending, because the species that had made it possible were gone. But Mem Thala had found something else in the human archives, a message of hope.